What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to another episode where we're covering what happened this week in the news. Some of the headlines we'll be covering: the end of the shutdown. The Epstein files are now a part of the landscape again, and some way too early forecasting for the 2028 presidential race. So let's get right into it. The shutdown has just ended, as we're aware, which was ultimately the longest shutdown in the history of the United States, which lasted for over 43 days. This was because the Democrats demanded that the Republicans add into the continuing resolution extensions for the enhanced ACA subsidies, which were ultimately subsidies being sent to insurance companies to allow for higher income Americans to receive reductions in their healthcare premiums. Now, ultimately, the Democrats didn't get these demands and still ended up voting for the original Republican CR. So I guess it's up in the air whether or not what the Democrats did even had any sort of meaning, or if they just shut the government down for the sake of doing so. Uh, the damage caused by this shutdown was felt by millions of Americans. There were about 1 million federal employees that did not receive pay for nearly 7 weeks. 20,000 flights were either delayed or canceled because of the shutdown, considering that air traffic controllers were also a part of those federal workers not getting paid during this time. However, considering those who did stay and work through the shutdown for air traffic control, Donald Trump has recently announced that he'll be giving them a $10,000 bonus for their efforts for staying true to what they do and for staying at work despite the government shutdown. However, all of this, all the drama regarding the government shutdown has left a major question mark in terms of the future of the Democratic Party's leadership. Uh, as was in the headlines, Nancy Pelosi is not running for re-election, who represents a district in San Francisco. She also was the most recent Speaker of the House for the Democratic Party. So the Democrats are certainly looking for the next party member who's going to be able to fill those shoes, at least within the House. Furthermore, Chuck Schumer's leadership has been under question, considering that many Democrats broke character during the shutdown, leaving Schumer's strength within the party in jeopardy. Do the Democrats really fall under his leadership, or are they now doing what they so choose? He was unable to keep the Democrats from um, voting in favor of the Republican CR, which now begs the question, is Chuck Schumer still the respected politician that he was even just a few months ago? Because just a few months ago, the Senate Democrats were pretty much at the whim of Chuck Schumer. And for a long duration through the shutdown was the case as well. So what's different now? Why have the Democrats chosen to break character and vote for the CR? Well, regardless, Schumer is on the hot seat, so to speak, in the Democratic Party. And the first time that his leadership has been questioned goes back to March of this year, again, only just a few months ago, when he voted to prevent the government from shutting down. And this time he votes for the government to shut down, and his leadership is still under question. So where Chuck Schumer stands in the future of Senate leadership is in question. And of course, Nancy Pelosi not running for re-election leaves a huge hole in the Democratic Party. So where do they go moving forward? I guess time will tell. The next story that we got is the Epstein files. And this has been shaking up the news for years now. And it's only just come back out into the forefront of the headlines that These Epstein files, these flight logs, are wanting to be released by Americans all over the country and even members within Congress. Democrats have certainly been pointing the fingers at Republicans, and Republicans have been pointing the finger right back at Democrats. So, what's at the bottom of what's going on right at this moment? You've got politicians like AOC, Jasmine Crockett, who are all suggesting that Trump is involved in this, and uh, Trump needs to face consequence, this, that, and the third. However, there was a House Republican the other day from Tennessee, Tim Burchett, who put forward what's called a discharge petition for unanimous consent. And this was done to release these files, these flight logs, whatever you want to call it, to be made available to the public. Now, what a discharge position is it takes a bill that is stuck within committee, bypasses committee, and puts it up on the floor for a vote. And so this is what a Republican representative tried to do the other day. However, it was the Democrats who blocked this from happening. So the Democrats are the ones preventing the Epstein flight logs to be released, at least at this moment currently. Now, a quote that's always stuck with me, if you want to know the motivation, look at the outcome. And the current outcomes that we're receiving are the Democrats calling Trump, this, that, and the third regarding Epstein, and they're the ones blocking these files from being released. So it almost comes off as a bit of projecting being done by the Democrats, considering they're the ones pointing the finger at Trump, and they're also the ones blocking these files from being released. So they know that there's nothing there to indict Trump with. If there was something there, it would have been released during the Biden administration. And if anything, if these logs, if these files are released, there would probably be more evidence against the Democrats than there is against the Republicans. But of course, this is only speculation. This is just based on, again, the current outcomes that we're getting regarding the situation. Now, according to Polymarket, which is just betting odds, I don't, I'm not a huge betting man, but I still find it interesting to see, what the odds of something happening are. The saying to put your money where your mouth is, well, where are people putting their money regarding the odds of this situation? Well, Polymarket has a few people who are at the top of the list in terms of the most likely to be within, these files, these flight logs. Within number one is Joe Biden, and within the top five is Barack Obama. So I think you can kind of see why the Democrats don't want these files released, is because they want to continue projecting their own guilt onto the Republicans when, based on the odds of the situation, they're the ones who are most likely to be guilty of whatever it is they may have partaken in with Jeffrey Epstein. With all that being said, our last story of today is regarding some forecasting, some way too early forecasting of the 2028 presidential election. Now, within the Republican primary, there's a handful of candidates in the discussion. However, there is a clear frontrunner, which is, of course, J.D. Vance, who, depending on the poll, is anywhere in the range of 40 to 50%. And then some others that are also, again, within discussion. You've got Donald Trump Jr., Ron DeSantis, Marco Rubio, again, in consideration, but not really competitive with J.D. Vance, at least at this moment. Now, flipping over to the Democratic primary, there's a handful of names that are actually relatively competitive with one another. It would appear that Gavin Newsom is the current frontrunner, but you're still seeing people who support another run from Kamala Harris, which I think is crazy. She definitely exposed herself in terms of being a very unlikable candidate. I think the country voted that way, and I think that they would probably vote that way again. But regardless, you've also got names like AOC, Pete Buttigieg, who are in that conversation, who are polling around 10%. So still relatively competitive on the Democratic side, but on the Republican side, at least at this moment, JD Vance seems to be really a shoe-in for the Republicans. Um, in terms of general election polling, JD Vance versus Gavin Newsom, which again at this moment would be the most likely outcome for the two candidates that would be running against each other in a general election. Emerson ran a poll which was published on October 17th showing Vance plus one. And if you remember back to the 2024 election, Trump had plus 1.5 and won 312 electoral votes. So if the Republicans come ahead even just by a little bit, they're gonna sweep the Electoral College, which seems to be the trend in recent elections. Like you can look back to George Bush, who lost the popular vote but won the Electoral College. Trump's first time around lost the electoral vote or lost the popular vote, sorry, but won the Electoral College. And then this time around, Trump plus 1.5 over Harris and swept House. So even just a small lead in terms of popular vote for the Republicans is actually a huge advantage. Again, going back to Polymarket in terms of the betting odds on who's most likely, what are the chances of a certain candidate being the primary winner, being the general election winner, so on and so forth. On the Republican side, Vance has a 57% chance of being the Republican candidate. Rubio's at about 8%, DeSantis at 2%. On the Democratic side, Newsom at 38%, AOC at 12, Buttigieg at 5, Harris at 5. Some of in terms of a rerun for Kamala Harris, because she has already put those processes in place in terms of running a presidential election. So she would have the most experience running for president on the Democratic side, considering that she's done so. Some polls even show her as high as 20% in the Democrat primary, but the betting odds have her at 5%, kind of going back to my previous point that when people have to, again, put their money where their mouth is, they're not betting on Kamala Harris to be the candidate. And I really just think that's because she showed herself as incredibly unlikable in the 2024 election. Now, betting odds on the general election has JD Vance at 29%, which makes him the front runner, Gavin Newsom at 19%, AOC at 9%, and Marco Rubio at 4%. So again, even the betting odds are showing JD Vance as a 10% favorite, 29% odds versus 19% odds of Gavin Newsom. So having even just 1% ahead in polling gives him a 10% advantage when it comes to betting odds. So again, just highlighting how influential a small popular vote lead is for the Republicans in general elections. So right at this moment, JD Vance would be the front runner to be the next US president. But again, this is way too early to predict anything concretely. It's all just speculation. I just find it interesting to see where people stack up even just a year into the second term of Trump's presidency. Nonetheless, there you have it, some of the biggest stories from this week, even some forecasting for the future. I hope you all enjoyed this episode, and I certainly hope to see you again next week. My name is Brett Cody Fornatoro. It was a pleasure talking to you.